You're listening to the Empowered Divorce Podcast, where you practice being the chooser in your life again, one day at a time. Thanks for joining me. Hello, my amazing, beautiful listeners. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Before I get into what I'm sharing with you on this episode, I just want to take a second and acknowledge something. If you are listening to this podcast, chances are you are in the middle of something really hard, just coming out of it, or trying to make sense of what your life looked like before you even got here. And wherever you are in that, I just want you to know that I see you. And this space is for you today. I am doing something a little bit different. I am actually airing a video I created called Stages of Denial, Denial Awareness, and the Courage to See Things as they really are. And I want to share it here because I honestly believe this is one of the most important conversations that we can have. And not just while we are still in the relationship trying to figure out what's real, but after we leave too, and especially during and after divorce. When you are going through divorce or even years after, we can still be in denial. Denial about the severity of what we experienced, denial about the impact that it had on us, and sometimes even denial about our own healing, telling ourselves that we should be further along than we are. I hear that one a lot. And the content in this video that I'm going to share with you today really does meet you wherever you are at right now. I also want to make sure that you know about something that I created that goes hand in hand with this. I have a free video series called Am I in an Abusive Relationship? And it walks you through the 8 domains of the relationship: the physical, sexual, financial, spiritual, emotional, relational, psychological, and even talks about coercive control. It's designed to help you gain real language for what you have lived, because one of the most disorienting things about coming out of an unhealthy relationship is that you have felt something for a very long time before you had words to describe that, to put to it. And having a language, it changes everything. It helps you stop second guessing yourself. It helps you own your story. It helps you walk maybe taller into the courtroom or into the therapist's office, or having a really hard conversation with family, your children. Being able to actually articulate your experience can help you have confidence again in your lived story and experience. Alongside this video series, I have a full relationship assessment that you can take. I really do encourage those of you to take it. Again, even if you are out of the relationship and still grappling with what happened, trying to identify those abusive pieces, then maybe just check out the free video series, see what resonates with you, and see if you want to dive deeper and take that full assessment. You can find both of those on my website, amywoolsey.com, but the link will be in the show notes. The video that you are about to hear, again, the stages of denial, that also will be on my website. Maybe even share it with a friend who might need it as well. I want to remind everybody that if you are looking for additional support, I also have a free monthly support group. It's a live Q&A that I do the first Thursday of every month in the evening, 6 p.m. Central Time. You can figure out your time zones from there. The link for that also will be in the show notes. If you haven't registered, it's a free registration. If you have, you'll get the reminder so you don't have to worry about checking in and remembering, because I know that's always hard for me too. So without further, there is the video that I created, The Stages of Denial. I want to start this video by naming something that I wholeheartedly relate to. Becoming aware of the reality of what's happening in your relationship is genuinely hard. It takes time to wrap your head around it. And there are stages to that, stages of healing, stages of denial. And understanding both might be one of the most important things that you do for yourself right now. Judith Herman, one of the most respected voices in trauma research, wrote that the conflict between the will to deny horrible traumatic events and the will to proclaim them out loud is the central dialectic of psychological trauma. And I love that she named it that, a conflict, not a failure. The internal war that many of you are experiencing right now of knowing and not knowing is not a character flaw. It is the very nature of what trauma does to us. When we start to see things as they really are, rather than what we've been told they are, led to believe they are, or what we desperately want them to be, the next step towards healing is acceptance, not approval, not condoning anything, just accepting reality for what it is, things as they really are, because that is the only place from which we can actually change things. Before lasting action can happen, acceptance has to come first. And it needs to come without that self judgment, shame, or blame that I think a lot of us do. And if you find yourself stuck there, I want to invite you to work with someone one on one. And if you are stuck, of course you are. This is hard. Give yourself a lot of grace. Something else that I think is worth naming is that there can be this place where we're trying so hard to be forgiving, Christ-like, peaceable. In that effort, we can continue to keep allowing unhealthy behavior. That often comes from, I think, a misunderstanding of what forgiveness and being peaceable actually mean. That's a conversation for another day, but it is worth holding. So rather than continuing to put our coins in that ride that just keeps going around and around and around, we can arrive at awareness with acceptance. And that can look like boundaries, maybe a little bit of space, separation, whether it's in-house or out, or if you choose, divorce. You can still hold space for someone's humanity while also deciding that they are not someone that you can share an experience with in a relationship. When you are no longer able to live within your value system and in integrity, then it might be time to consider what your next step is. Many people find it really difficult to acknowledge their current or past abuse because sometimes this comes from thoughts like, I should have known better, or, well, I asked for this for not speaking up. Well, I chose to marry them. Or even what I experienced really wasn't that bad because so and so experienced it much, much worse. Or it's not like it was physical. And if you're in that comparing mode and you haven't seen the video series that I do on the different domains of abuse, then head over and watch that video series. But other times, I think we repress what happened and what's happening, hoping that if we don't look at it directly or we just hang on tightly enough, then it will pass. They'll change or it'll stop impacting us. What we do know is this, that the longer emotional pain from any of these abusive dynamics, when they go unacknowledged, the more it continues to shape your life in quiet, invisible ways, to the point where it can start to slowly erode you and erase your shape to where you're invisible even to yourself. And as you begin to acknowledge what's happened to you, your impact, the reality of the dynamics in the relationship, getting a language to describe them, you start to get your power back, your personal power back. Not all at once, but in very real ways. You start to take shape again in your life and in relationships. Sometimes, in order to get your shape back, so to speak, it requires you to step out of a relationship. But when these big emotions start to arise, as you start to see things a little bit more clearly, knowing that it is normal to feel some of these emotions that you have felt during abuse, those feelings have been living inside of you. They've been waiting to be witnessed by you and moved through. They often are not as dangerous as your brain wants to believe. Sometimes we think if we start feeling, we're never going to get up. We're never going to be able to function. And I really want to encourage you to work with someone to help you process them, not because you can't handle it, but because you do deserve some very real support and someone that gets this. The devaluation and internal damage that happens because of the abuse is profound. We can feel tied to the abuser because the nervous system has learned to scan for them as a cue for safety. Current research on trauma bonding tells us that the constant cycle of fear, relief, and emotional pain keeps that nervous system on high alert, and that survivors may suppress or downplay the recognition of abuse when the person causing harm is also someone that they emotionally, financially depend on. Because full awareness would then feel like a threat, and then you would lose your sense of security. Again, this doesn't mean that you're weak. In fact, the women that I work with who are in these situations are the strongest, most independent, intellectual women that I've ever met. This really is just your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. It designed the blueprint. Evan Stark, whose work on coercive control has fundamentally changed how abuse is understood. Thank goodness. So he describes the survivor as becoming captive in an unreal world created by the abuser, entrapped in a world of confusion, contradiction, and fear. So when that is the world that you've been living in, denial is not stubbornness. A lot of times I see professionals approach it that way with clients, or just change the way that you think. It's a rational adaptation to an environment specifically designed to make your reality hard to see, if not seen at all. Here's an analogy that I often come back to. Think about a house that you grew up in that leaned slightly to the left. The foundation was built, it had a little bit of a tilt. So everything in that house had a slight tilt. Every door stuck a little bit, every picture hung just a little bit crooked. And over time, you stopped noticing it was just home. It wasn't until you visited someone else's house that the thought landed, wait, floors aren't supposed to slope like that? But you can't blame someone for not knowing the floor was uneven when they never had another floor to compare it to. Awareness doesn't always come from paying closer attention to the same environment. Sometimes it only comes when something outside of it gives you a different reference point. That's not a failure of perception. That's just what happens when uneven has been your normal for long enough. So for many of you, that uneven started long before this relationship did. Denial works differently depending on which side of the relationship that you're on. So if an abuser uses denial to shift blame and minimize the severity of their behaviors, their actions, often deny that anything happened at all, then this leaves survivors feeling angry, confused, like they're crazy, losing their grip on reality. In fact, Lundy Bancroft, who spent years working directly with abusive men, he said it so plainly. If the man is abusive, of course he's going to deny it, partly to protect himself and partly because his perceptions are distorted. If he were ready to accept responsibility for his actions and relationships, he wouldn't be abusive. That right there is worth sitting with for just a moment, maybe hit pause. His denial is not evidence that your perception is wrong. In fact, in many ways, it's confirmation of the problem itself. Current research describes denial, minimization, justification, rationalization, and blaming as common patterns among those who commit intimate partner abuse. So patterns that protect their sense of identity while also serving very specific purpose in the relationship. No matter the reason, none of it's to excuse the behavior, and none of it makes what you're experiencing inside this relationship less real. Now, the harder question is, why do I stay in denial? Most often because denial protects us from discomfort. It's a form of avoidance, a way of not having to really live fully in what is real. The brain is actually wired for that. It's one of the first protective responses that we developed. Denial helps us manage physical and emotional pain, fear, shame, conflict. It exists for a reason. My 3-year-old granddaughter right now is learning that denial is saving her from getting in trouble. We learn it very, very early. The challenge is that while it feels safer in the short term, living there long term causes more harm than the discomfort it was trying to protect you from. Think of it like a dimmer switch. Nobody just turns the lights off all at once. It's slow, almost imperceptibly slow. So today it's a little darker than it was a year ago, but you adjusted to last month's lighting. So this month still feels normal. You keep adapting, keep trusting your eyes. By the time the room is genuinely dark, you've worked so hard to adjust that you've convinced yourself you can still see just fine. And when someone from the outside walks in and says, oh my gosh, it's so dark in here, Your first instinct is to wonder if something is wrong with their eyes. Again, that does not say anything about you in a negative way. That is you surviving an environment that has changed so gradually that your nervous system kept pace with every shift. Something else that I think is worth sitting with here is that when you can't see things as they really are, you also can't see your own progress in real time. So you might know things have gotten really bad, but you don't want to see just how bad. And that gap between knowing and fully seeing is where I see a lot of women live for a long time. Now let's talk about the degrees of denial. So denial doesn't look the same for everybody, and it doesn't always feel like lying to yourself. A couple common ways that I see this show up. The first is simply not acknowledging that the problem exists at all. The second is minimizing or rationalizing it. It wasn't that bad. At least it wasn't this. So and so has it worse. Everyone argues. Marriage is hard. He was just stressed. He had a lot of childhood trauma. The third is acknowledging that something has happened, but not recognizing the impact that it's had on you or even your children. And then the fourth is knowing the impact and still being unwilling to reach for help. So most survivors of abuse live in that third place. They don't fully grasp the impact of these destructive dynamics and abusive behaviors and what that has taken on them or even on their children, which is often what sets the stage for PTSD or CPTSD long after they've left. If the full truth were faced, they'd be far more likely to seek support, which is, of course, exactly why that level of awareness is so hard to reach while still in it. Another reason that we stay in denial is simply familiarity. If we grew up in an environment, going back to that analogy of the slightly tilted house, if we grew up in an environment where some version of this was normal, we don't have that reference point that tells us something is wrong. That's the first degree denial, not because we're in denial of something we know, but because we genuinely don't know another way. Here are some signs that you might be in denial, and some of these might feel very familiar. See which of these land for you. Again, without any judgment, shame, or blame. Maybe hit pause if something pricks and write it down. Tell yourself that you can look a little bit deeper into it later. So are you spending more time thinking about how you wish things would be than how they actually are? Hanging on to potential, seeing potential in someone, knowing that they have the potential to maybe behave a certain way, but is that the reality? Is that what's actually happening day to day? Doubting or dismissing your own feelings, probably because it's not safe to feel them or share them. Believing promises that have been broken before. I'll never do it again. Next time will be different. Sure, I'll get help. Or leaving out details when you describe your relationship to other people to protect yourself, but to protect your partner. Or because the softened version is the one that you have started to tell the most. It's the version that feels better. Or you're hoping things will improve when some future event happens. If we get the new job, when we move, when we go on vacation, if we just have this fresh start, that resembles denial. Or feeling like you're walking on eggshells, comparing your situation to others and deciding that yours isn't bad enough to count. Then there's omission. Omission is one of the quieter forms of denial. It's when we leave out the hard parts of our story, even just to ourselves. It contributes to the memory loss that is actually really common among a lot of abuse survivors. I totally did this. When my ex-husband came at my head with a fist and ended up hitting the door behind me, breaking his hand, I made up a different story that I told my kids and my family. It was easy to do it, actually. He praised me for it. I have real memory loss around certain events because I told myself the softer version and told everyone else the softer version for so long that my gut stopped being trusted. Compliance is another one. When we just go along with what we don't actually want, pretending that things are fine when they aren't. This is another form of denial, and it keeps us again from having to face what is real. Another way that we can do this is intellectualizing. This I see as a form of denial too. because it's getting so deep into analyzing and reasoning that we bypass the body and the impact entirely. It feels like processing, which is tricky, which is the tricky part, but it's often thinking about a situation in order to avoid feeling it. So the body holds the truth that the mind is working overtime to manage. Then there's the hopelessness. Now, while this can feel a little different from denial, I think it often functions the same. When we believe that there is no other option, there's nowhere else to go, or nothing is ever going to change. It'll be worse if I leave. That keeps us just as stuck. It is, not coincidentally, exactly where the abuser benefits from you staying. There's a really well-known study that analyzed recorded phone calls between men that were charged with felony domestic violence. What these researchers found was a predictable pattern every single time. The abuser minimized what happened. He emphasized his own loneliness and suffering. He took on the role of the one who was hurting, and sympathy was extended. The language shifted to us against the world, us against the police, us against the detectives, us against the law, and the charges were dropped. That pattern moved through 5 distinct stages. First, there's an initial argument where the survivor held her ground. Then, minimization and emotional appeals from the abuser. Then, declarations of love and shared isolation. Then, the ask, and then the compliance. I don't share this at all to create shame if you have been here or you're recognizing this in yourself. I share this because when we know the pattern, when we can see it happening in real time and name it, it is the beginning of not being moved by it. So, okay, Amy, what can I do now? Where do I start? Let's start with the body. Notice what happens physically before difficult conversations. Notice what happens to the body during conversations. And then notice what's happening in your body after conversations. Get out a journal, a reality check journal. I've had clients that name it that, and start writing down what you're noticing in those different phases of a conversation. Notice what your body does when your partner comes home. Does your chest tighten? Does your breathing change? Does your body start quickly making everything perfect? That's information. Your body has been tracking the truth of your situation, believe it or not, even when your mind is working so hard to make all of it manageable. So we start by listening to the body. The next step is leaning into what that information is telling you. And this is where you're going to have to be careful of no judgment, shame, or blame. And I would also add that a lot of times when clients start leaning into this, the brain will go, you can't divorce, you can't leave, you can't. Let's leave any big decisions and the D word out of this right now. Again, we're just gathering information. So as you notice what the body signals, you're noticing some patterns. Now, what is this telling you? Which means leaning into the emotions that come with it rather than trying to run away from it or deny it. So anxiety, fear, sadness, those are not dangerous. Those emotions are not dangerous. They don't need to be moralized. They're not good, bad, right, or wrong. Just information. They're forms of energy that when we do resist, it's holding that big ball under the water. The more you push it down, it's going to explode. When we start to make space for them, those emotions, and move through them, then we can start to return back to ourselves. We start to take shape again. If this feels really hard, if it feels impossible, then work one-on-one with someone. Learn how to actually feel your feelings, not just think about them. This is one of the most important investments that you can make in yourself right now without maybe having to make really big, hard decision right now. This is actually where real movement does start to happen. With acceptance, the goal is to do something without self-judgment or shame. You did not choose this. And beginning to see it clearly, the reality clearly is not the same thing as having failed to see it sooner. I promise. Seeing it now is everything. when the big emotions come, as you see things more clearly, you will likely find yourself stepping into grief. That's appropriate. That's right. That makes sense. No one wants this to be their story. No one chooses for this to be their story. And grieving for what you hoped for, what you were promised, what you believed was possible, what you dreamed, what you thought you agreed on. That is not you being weak or stupid, silly, or expecting too much. That is the beginning of living in what is real. So let's get curious rather than judgmental with yourself most of all. Healing really is possible. It really does begin every time with one small step just right now in seeing things as they really are. If you need additional support, then feel free to reach out and book a consultation with me. And if you're looking for more information around your impact, learning the language to describe the different dynamics in your relationship in all of those 8 domains of the relationship, and you haven't checked out the video series, Am I in an Abusive Relationship Yet? It is a free video series. Feel free to check that out at amywoolsey.com. I just want to sit with you for a second after that, because I know that that may have been a lot to take in for some of you. Some of it may have landed in a way that felt relieving, like finally having a name for something that you've been carrying. Some of it may have stirred up emotions that maybe you weren't expecting today. Both of these responses make total sense. Give yourself some grace to process it. What I desire for you to walk away with is that seeing things clearly is not the same as having failed to see them sooner. Awareness is not a reason to be hard on yourself. It is actually the bravest step toward building something completely different. If what you heard today is resonating and you want to go deeper, then check out that free video series, Am I in an Abusive Relationship? Or check out the assessment. The links for all of that will be in the show note. No pressure, no timeline. It'll be there when you're ready. That you, no matter what has happened, still are the chooser in your life. And you get to create the life that you want, despite what you've experienced, because you can. Take care, everybody.